Governor Josh Green finalizes his veto list.
What made the cut and what didn't, we'll ask him live. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, Aloha, thanks for tuning in here to Spotlight Now on Hawaii News Now. We're going to be joined by the governor in just a few moments, but we always encourage those of you watching at home or online to engage in the conversation. You can enter your comments and questions for the governor on our Facebook page at Hawaii News Now, or by scanning this QR code at the bottom of your screen. We'll be monitoring the questions throughout the broadcast.
And we want to welcome in the governor now. Good to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
As we mentioned right off the top, you have released your final veto list, and also you've been signing a flurry of bills over the last few weeks. I'm just curious, before we dive into that veto list, what's the bill that you're most excited about signing this session?
The tax breaks. The tax breaks for our working families, for Alice families, is an absolute game changer as far as affordability goes for people in our state. It's critical. That's one of the biggest challenges we have. People are leaving the state because they can't afford to live in Hawaii. So we're moving the tax bracket significantly. Soon, 40% of anyone in our state who's living paycheck to paycheck will pay no taxes at all. That's state taxes. That was the biggest thing. There are a million things we could talk about. We also passed legislation to change our housing approach, meaning that you can build ADUs on open lots, on space that you have on your property, again, because we don't have enough housing for our loved ones. That was a big bill. There's so many, but there were about 260 bills that were sent to my desk. All but 7 of them became law, and a couple of them had some technical flaws, so they had to be vetoed. So it was a good session. I'm really proud of most of the legislature. Virtually all of them did something positive during the session, and we're moving forward. Lots to talk about.
Let's dive into some of these vetoes that you ended up declaring that you will be using your executive power as governor to veto. There are a number of, I believe there are a total of 10 bills, or there are, how many did we end up vetoing
7,
here? 7
yeah.
bills.
Yes.
But there are also some line item vetoes that cut out some portions and that you had to do to really help out with the budget, as you were saying. If you can just sort of explain the process of having to make those decisions, especially with some of the line item vetoes and really changing some of the allocations that maybe some of the departments were relying on.
Sure. So, the overall budget is big, right? It's upwards of like $19 billion total. 10.3 billion comes from the state. The other is federal dollars and special funds and so on. At the end of the day, I line itemed or vetoed or reduced about $550 million. Most of that was from a single bill, which would have taken $300 million and placed it again into the rainy day fund. We already have $1.5 billion in the rainy day fund. I have not touched that in spite of the crisis on Maui from the wildfire. And another $135 million from that bill, which was House Bill 40, would have gone and done an early payment on the ERS, the retirement fund. That $435 million is necessary for us to be in the black. I can't not have a balanced budget. So at the end of the day, I wanted to have at least a $300 million carryover so that we are okay for the purposes of paying people's paychecks, for the purpose of funding emergency projects and all of what we're doing. Normally, I'd like it to be 500. I was willing to accept 300, but it couldn't be in the red. So that was the big one. And then there's some line item vetoes where we made like $10 million or $20 million appropriations, and our department just isn't yet even ready to spend that much money in the upcoming year. And so I didn't want to take away from any of the excellent work that has to be done. And I know that a lot of legislators put their hearts into some of these appropriations. We kept almost all of their priorities and budget plays in place, but just had to be a little careful. So last year, you'll remember, I line item vetoed $1 billion. And thank goodness I did, because we ended up needing quite a lot of money to deal with the wildfire on Maui. This year, about half as much, and most of it, like I said, was instead of putting that thing in, that appropriation of $435 million away, I just kept it available to us. There's just a lot of work to do on so many challenges, and in many ways it is raining. If you're homeless, if you are without a place to go on Maui, if you are still waiting to see your school improved. So I'm trying to kind of reach an equilibrium that's sensible.
I don't want to get into an argument about the math, but our Daryl Huff is working on a story today about some progressive lawmakers who say that you cut more than was needed, and their estimation is actually closer to $1 billion. So I know you're saying it's about half that, but I want to go back. You said that the thing they're most proud of are these tax cuts. Do you feel that perhaps the tax cuts went a little too far, and now you're having to make these cuts to balance a budget that maybe would not have needed this much trimming had they not gone as far as they had?
Well, that's not even a real narrative if someone posits that theory, because the tax cuts don't even kick in until January 1 next year, and they're very modest in the first 2 years. So in the out years, we're going to be doing a lot of different things. One of those is we're going to be cutting back on vacant positions that have been unfilled for 4 years. That's one of our policy decisions that we'll be pretty much executing, and I'm working on that with the team. That could bring a lot of resources back into the budget. These are positions that haven't been used for, like I said, more than 4 years. It's interesting because, let me get my blood up a little bit here. This quote-unquote progressive group of legislators, which are very usually new legislators, first they want affordability and tax equity, and I give it to them. And then they complain that the budget isn't adequate, and I guess it's their pet projects aren't getting funded the way they want. Did they ever see anyone fund homeless services like this before, or mental health care services? No, because they weren't in the legislature. They don't have any experience at these things. And the idea that it's $1 billion of cuts is just patently incorrect. So I hope that they will work with the veterans that have been working on these budgets for a long time, get their facts straight. I also hope that they will look to see what we've actually done, which is monumental work for Alice families in our state. So it's very, very hypocritical that they come to me and ask for their special projects for their districts, whether it's a hospital appropriation or something else, and then complain later that they don't like to see a cut here or there.
Well, the cut here or there, let's look at this. Some of the estimated cuts, and you referenced one of them, the invasive species, going from 20 million now to 10. So, and library and construction repairs, 19 million. School construction repairs, 49 million. University of Hawaii college repairs, $80 million. Why cuts to those programs in particular?
Because we won't even get to implement those programs. We don't even have the capacity to do it. Those were false appropriations. Those appropriations could not be executed over the course of this year. It was a mechanism perhaps to hide money, and that's not what I'm interested in doing. I'm interested in having an honest budget line, and we can only do so much when we have enormous challenges, whether it's homelessness or mental health care issues. We won't be able to spend a full $20 million. So cutting it down to 10 is just actually giving it back to the legislature for next year so they can appropriate these dollars for the more immediate problems that we can actually act on. So I think that they misunderstand, the people that are complaining to you or to Daryl. They misunderstand actually how government is run. And that's disappointing because I lived as a legislator for 14 years. I watched these games. The chair people of the budget and finance committees did very well, whether it's finance or ways and means. But then these complaints that come from people who are agitating from the edge, they don't really realize what it takes to administer work. We will do all that we can to spend these monies. And then when we come back into the session in January, if we've successfully expended these dollars, they can come back and give us new ideas. But a lot of it is phantom work that we didn't even ask for, appropriations that weren't put on our list that we can accommodate. So they should be a little bit more discerning, honestly.
I think when you look from the outside perspective, if people aren't really in the weeds with some of the numbers and they don't know these specific allocations and they see these large numbers that we're putting forward of the amount that's being vetoed, $1 billion last year, you're saying 500 million this year. When you look at that, some might say, well, didn't the legislature, could they not figure things out? Why did it have to get to the point where you're having to step in and make these types of changes? Can you talk through that process of what has changed from when session ends to this decision now to save that much money? Because some may say, wait, does the legislature know what they're doing if you're having to cut this much? And where's the disconnect in where we are financially as a state?
Sure. Well, there are some big things that have been happening. We're still cleaning up from some pretty big disasters. For example, the COVID crisis occurred, and then I ended up having the responsibility of honoring contracts that required that we spend $450 million on hazard pay. So $450 million is being expended from these budgets directly to those who worked in the public sector and who were exposed to COVID but still went to work every day. And if they worked more than 420 days, they got the higher amount of money, and less than 420 days during COVID, they got the lower amount of money. But that was in their contract. I'm honoring it, of course, and I honor people who did hard work. $450 million gone. Also, the Council on Revenues comes in and they make adjustments. We had pretty significant, I guess I would say, incidents during the first year. So 335 days ago, we had the terrible fire in Lahaina, which cost us, our expenditure has been just under $400 million as a state. The federal government has spent about $2.5 billion so far. We tend to spend about 10% to 15% of the overall kind of recovery effort. Again, big numbers that I have to manage in a budget. So when they complain about whether or not I can spend an extra $7 million or $10 million on a project while everyone, it's all hands on deck, I don't think that they, in this case, this smaller group of legislators that are complaining, understand exactly what's going on. And they're also the first to put their arms around me when I sign off on a capital improvement project for a fence or a field or something in their district. So I find it a little bit disingenuous at times. But I'm doing my best to keep us ready for the next disasters. And I also had to do a couple other things. I'm not sure some of the less experienced legislators know this. And look, 90% of the legislators are totally in the know and get this. But I have to keep enough money over year for our bond rating. Otherwise, our interest rates go through the roof. And so that's why we have $1.5 billion in the rainy day fund, why we have several $100 million in the hurricane relief fund, why I have to keep at least $300 million, preferably more, in our carryover balance. Because otherwise, we'll spend a lot of money, which will be wasted money, on paying down our debt through interest. So there are more considerations just than their pet projects. And I still move mountains with the help of course, Kyle Yamashita, Donovan Dela Cruz, and all the people that they work closely with to get that tax break signed, because that's really what the people of Hawaii needed.
Well, I want to key into something that you said, and that is that we're not going to feel these tax breaks and necessarily the impact on our budget for a few years to come. You know, the legislature went above and beyond what you had asked for with these tax breaks. And perhaps in some people view that this went too far and that this is giving rich folks too much and that the cost is underestimated. Do you think that there's any truth to that?
Hard to know right now. It used to be that 60% of our income tax base was paid by higher income people. After this tax break, it will be 80%. So much more of the tax base will be paid by wealthy people. But, you know, I'm trying to be sensible about the cuts. Now, in the out years, they're going to keep looking at it year over year over year. The tax breaks that will be maintained will be, for sure, those for those people that are living paycheck to paycheck. Hopefully, all of the tax break can be maintained. But for the higher tax brackets, it is less impactful. We know implicitly that people who are living paycheck to paycheck spend all of their money locally. And for that matter, everyone who gets hazard pay, who's in the workforce, the public worker workforce, is going to spend all of their bonuses and hazard pay directly in our local economy because they're just surviving. They're trying to get a truck after having a truck that's 12 years old. They're paying their back rent. They're paying down their credit cards. So it is possible year over year, and the legislature is going to look at this, that if there has to be any adjustment, they'll adjust the higher brackets. I did ask for, closer to $1 billion in tax breaks initially. They just went all the way and did the whole 6-year plan, which was stunning, but also quite cool because overall, I do want to move us to a much more progressive tax base. And I don't think people who are, making $60,000 or $70,000 a year should be getting hit quite so hard with our state taxes.
I just want to ask, as you release your intent to veto list and then ultimately making the decisions on those pieces of legislation that you do decide to veto, what is that conversation like with House and Senate leadership, with those lawmakers that have introduced this? Are you engaging in those conversations? And if you can talk about sort of the negotiation that might exist during that time that could maybe lead to some disagreements. But if you can speak to that process of how you ultimately led and the communication that's happening with those lawmakers.
Sure. So, well, there were 17 bills that, that I asked or I decided had to be considered for veto. Several of those bills that were vetoed ultimately were the recommendations of the legislature themselves, because there was an error that was found or something got resolved in the 6 weeks or 8 weeks between the end of the legislative session and when I would have to sign the bill. So a lot of that's still going on. And then if you don't need a piece of legislation, it can go away. There were a couple bills that were redundant, that were very similar, and then one of them went away. But in general, I speak with the leadership. They tell me what their caucus is worried about or what they're fighting for. I hear from the principals of the bills in some cases, especially if a legislator has carried that bill themselves basically and pushed it all the way through. And sometimes it's just a judgment call based on my values. We went right down to the wire on a bill that would either open or keep closed the period of time where people could file a lawsuit if there had been some kind of sex assault or sex abuse. And I decided it was a tough call in some ways because the logistics of this bill were complicated, but in the end, the morality of it was necessary, which is to say, I thought that we should not veto the bill and give people an opportunity to pursue justice. So there are some issues like that. There are other things I just don't agree with. I did veto the university bill that was it's called the RCUH bill. This is a bill that would have greatly restricted the university's ability to do a lot of the projects and programs that they get federal grants for and state grants. And the university is our economic driver. I'm not trying to say anything negative about the individuals that pushed that bill, but there has been an interpersonal conflict. And in some cases, it's my job to kind of adjudicate those conflicts. And conflicts are not healthy for us. We need the university to thrive. There are better ways than having a bill that would kind of sock it to them, so to speak. And so that bill did get vetoed, and they can continue to work together in the next years on this. Also, we're going to have a new university president, and I felt that this was not the time to change our policy significantly with the university until we had the new leadership in place. So those are the kind of conversations I have. There's no question that individual legislators lobby me. I ended up signing Stanley Chang's bill because he's worked so hard on housing with me. And though even some of the people in my own administration were concerned about how it might affect some of our going forward housing projects, I trusted to our relationship between he and I because he really fought hard to get the other housing bill passed and the short-term rental bill passed. So there's some times where I'll give someone the benefit of the doubt, even if the administration's pushing against something. I'm really open-minded about that.
Well, one of the bills that you initially put on that list and then took off was the driving without a license penalty. There had been concern from law enforcement that this would be too difficult. Tell us about what changed your mind. And for viewers who are not familiar, this was in response to the teenager who was killed in a hit-and-run incident on Kapiolani Boulevard, Sarah Yara, about a little over a year ago, I believe, in February. Yes. But tell us what changed your mind on that, given that the law enforcement community was saying that this could be too difficult to enforce.
Yeah, in this particular case, Speaker Psyche intervened directly with me and asked me to sign that bill to make sure that we could continue to move forward on safety. The bill itself may be difficult to implement because there are so many people driving without a license that the courts may just get overwhelmed. And overwhelming the courts could theoretically have a negative and unexpected impact, which is we get less people busted. But Scott cares very deeply about his community, and he just intervened. He just said, at the end of the day, do you mind signing that bill in spite of the fact that law enforcement has this concern, and we will work it out. We'll work it out administratively, and that's what a good legislator does. They find ways to work with the administration, to work with law enforcement, to work with whatever department there is to get something going. And sometimes you just got to go forward. That particular bill requires people to have their, they get a felony offense if they are 3 times caught within 5 years without having a license. And what this is meant to do is to really crack down on people who are behaving very irresponsibly. They could also lose their car, which, they're probably using someone else's car, but truth be told, people have to be accountable. I don't know at all if that would save that beautiful young woman's life. I can tell you overall, though, the more actions we take that are sensible, the fewer accidents we'll have. And so in this case, the speaker intervened directly. And of course, the way it works is in the legislature, if you spend enough time and you elevate and you have been respected by your colleagues, you get these more important roles. So the speaker and the Senate president are the most powerful two individuals when it comes to policy. And if they straight up ask me to do something, I'm a lot more inclined to straight up do it.
Well, one of the things that we talked to the speaker about here on the program last week was the rising cost of condo insurance. This was an issue, of course, that the legislature tried to address, a bill that ultimately failed in the final moments, but something that we know that he is working hard on to try to find some resolution. In our discussion last week, which included Commissioner Ito, one of the things that they said is that intervention needs to happen, whether it be through a special session or yourself to get involved to address the rising costs of the insurance. And many people are having and feeling that burden right away. Have you had any further discussions with the speaker about what a resolution like this looks like? He laid out a couple of examples last week, but I'm wondering where your head's at with this issue.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about this. So you're correct that the speaker has been fighting hard on behalf of the whole state and especially the condo community for changes. We're seeing 200 and 300 and 400% increases in insurance in some cases. And it's a reflection of all sorts of things. One of them is that the global market on insurance has exploded. And so costs for the reinsurance market for people that insure the insurers has gone way up. There are a lot of solutions that we have to consider. I actually was disappointed that at the end of the day, they didn't accept Speaker Psyche's bill. I think that would have been very helpful. We still may have to have a special session to intervene. I think what we're going to ultimately have to do is provide insurance support or a level of foundational support in our own insurance market with our own dollars to subsidize or to be some of the words that are used occasionally are the insurer of last resort in order to prevent these large spikes. We are in some other large discussions, and that's regarding the wildfire settlements. That, again, is a very insurance-heavy discussion because $3 billion has been paid out already for the damage from the wildfires. And so as this continues to happen in Hawaii, in California, in Oregon, there are large spikes in insurance costs. The world got more expensive. Some of it's inflation. Some of it is panic amongst those markets. And the state of Hawaii might either have to have a self-insured program or this kind of other option, this insurance of last resort. So they're not sure I should be using those words yet. I'm still working this out with this panel, but it's got leadership from Speaker, Senate President, some of the key legislators like Jared Kehokalole. Of at least one insurance commissioner, probably two are already in it. It's a huge problem that we will solve over the course of these next several months and into next year. I'm also going to directly negotiate as governor with some of these insurers to make sure that they understand where we're headed. One of the things I think we need to do, and we've talked about this a lot of different times and a lot of different permutations of this idea, is a going forward approach to mitigate the huge potential losses from natural disasters. And that is like an insurance product that helps our state if another fire happens, or of course if a hurricane hits us badly and so on. We should be taking in monies from those who travel here as an impact fee to do that. And I'm now working on with a separate work group on that too. And it has to happen. If it doesn't happen, we are going to have to take a percentage of our TAT, the transient accommodation tax, and use that specifically for this need. And that would take away other resources that we just have. So these are the problems that I have as a governor because we're in an era now that has bigger issues. Now we're doing other things to help mitigate the large costs and increases in insurance. For example, the legislature gave us a very good wildfire package. And some of the cuts that you're describing were necessary so I could actually pay for instance, having a team that becomes the head of the wildfire response, to have a fire marshal, to do the hundreds of millions of dollars of work that are along the roads every year to cut through, basically fire breaks. This is not cheap, and this is really important work. And by having more mitigation in place, having extra sensors and weather monitors, millions and millions of dollars are being spent to prevent that next fire from hitting whether it's West Maui or Waikoloa or Ewa, all the very dry parts of our state. This is the stuff that will also protect us and decrease our costs. But those are the kind of priorities I have to push, and at the same time make sure we can have a state where people can live here.
I want to get to Maui in just a moment, but just one more thing on the insurance markets. When you say we're going to fix this in a few months, it doesn't mean that we're going to get the insurance rates that we had, pre Lahaina. That's just not possible. When we talk to insurance experts, they say that there's a new standard that has been set, and it's going to be difficult to go back. So when we think about what a fix actually looks like, what is the state's capacity? Because there is a limit to what the state can put in.
It's a good point. It's not at all clear how much we can do to contain rates, whether we can keep them just going up like 20 or 30% as opposed to 300%. And you've been around long enough to see gas prices go up when there is a shortage of gas, and then the shortage is lifted and we don't see the prices drop significantly, right? Those are people taking advantage of markets, which always concerns me. I'm willing to subsidize a lot of this if it's for the good of all. In other words, if it keeps our property values up, which is for the good of all, if it prevents older people from having, because they're on a fixed income, from having to relocate, which is very costly to them, and it separates them from their grandchildren. So we will see how much we can come up with. I'm perfectly willing to tap the hurricane relief funds or other funds that were, mind you, those were overpayments historically for insurance. Like when we had terrible hurricanes, there was extra payment into those funds to protect against other challenges. This is a challenge. It's just not a physical challenge that's taken out of building. However, like I said earlier, we did have $3 billion of payouts on Maui. Of which some of that money through settlement will go back to the insurers, some small amount or some modest amount. There are some pretty big challenges that we ended up getting in this particular cycle of governing, and this is why. And forgive me when I get my back up a little bit. The complexity is extreme. The idea that people complain about, me carving down an appropriation just to half when we will not even spend the money. They lack a fundamental understanding of what's really going on in the administration of government. All these questions you're asking are really to the point, that the complexity is there for the big picture, and the big picture has to be honored.
All right, we got a lot more to talk about with Governor Green, including an update from Maui. The efforts were nearing that 1-year anniversary next month. Also, getting his take on the Biden administration and the health of the president. We'll have more with the governor coming up right after this. Hello and welcome back to Spotlight Now here on Hawaii News Now. We'll continue on in our conversation with the governor. Of course, we also want to remind you and those of you watching at home that you can engage in the conversation by scanning this QR code. We have a lot to get to with the governor in our next half hour.
Yeah, let's start with Maui. You mentioned 335 days since Lahaina wildfires. Tell us your thoughts, this many days out and then with the anniversary steadily approaching, how you're feeling about how things have gone there and what you're hoping the next year brings.
Yes, thank you. Incredible resiliency on the part of the people of Lahaina. Amazing. The accomplishments that they drove are astounding. We actually changed the way we look at short-term rentals, which will make housing possible for the people of Lahaina. That's a big deal, and it's getting its kind of time in the county council over there. But the real human parts are even more incredible. Over the first 13 days, we moved 7,796 people into hotel rooms. As of July 5th, the last of the individuals that were connected to the state program were finally fully into long-term housing. Just our heart is with them because we had to really press hard to do that. There are a couple families left out of the 3,071 family units that were in the hotels. A couple are left there, but they have either disabilities or some significant challenges. So we got everyone moved out. We've begun the construction of 1,044 transitional homes, which is going to be an important part of the solution going forward. We're anticipating $1 billion of HUD monies to help us build a lot of housing, hopefully with Kamehameha schools. And already 89% of the debris has been removed from the residential lot. So people are getting permits actually to rebuild in Lahaina where the fire occurred. So it's just been incredible to see this happen so much faster than any other state. I also am working right now to try to settle all the claims to get people their resources for those who, God forbid, lost a loved one, but also who lost their home or lost businesses. So by the 1-year anniversary, which is essentially a month from now, we'll be able to share all of the extra details. It is really incredible how people pulled together, but I'm going to forever reflect on the 102 loved ones that we lost. That's where it is right now. And I will be pushing pretty hard like I do to make sure that we actually build things. And we, in spite of some of the normal delays, we are under the emergency rules, the emergency proclamation to help people do that. We'll be more mindful about water. Another thing we're going to do is we're going to give Moku'ula back to the people of Lahaina and restore that water. So the state's properties and the county properties will go into the hands of the community. It'll take some time and work. We've been doing it for the last couple months so that cultural corridor is restored. And that, in many people's minds, is the act of good faith that brings us together. So all these things are happening. And again, I'm heartbroken that some of these things take time. But in other places like California, they took 3 and 4 years to do some of these things. And I just decided we had to go out and move faster.
Well, when you're talking about some of the first permits that are already being issued for that rebuilding process, you also have to think about the overall infrastructure, and that is something that many have been concerned about, is just the overall safety of moving back into this area. You're talking about water lines, electrical lines, just the overall infrastructure of what that place looks like. In this next year, as you look ahead, how do you navigate through that, and where would you say the state is at right now with providing that infrastructure?
Well, we're still finalizing the debris removal, right? So that will be done in the next 30 days or so. A few of the commercial lots may not be done quite yet, but that clearance is very helpful because then you can lay down the new pipelines, and you can make sure that all the electric is restored and the sewer is restored. We can only offer permits, and that's really the task of the county when each and everyone in their area has what they need to live. We will be dropping in some transitional houses. We're trying to expedite that. They're smaller and they have a kind of a smaller impact or less impact environmentally. It's just a long process. There will ultimately be fewer houses, I'm sure, built in Lahaina where the wildfire occurred because some houses had been stacked on top of one another and it ended up being somewhat unsafe. But for that reason, we will make sure that we have other land available. And I can tell you that one of our partners, and I mentioned it earlier, has been very thoughtful and generous, and that's Kamehameha Schools. They are working on plans, and they're thoughtful plans to help build extra housing in the region with us, where we would apply the infrastructure and use bonds and a lot of the monies, it's called CDBG DR money, that's disaster relief money that comes from the federal government. That's going to be upwards of $1 billion, and that money that the county will manage will go towards all of this extra infrastructure. So watch for that in the coming year. This is somewhere where we're very grateful to our congressional delegation. Senator Schatz has been the top dog on this for much of the last few months, and these are the things we have to do. But rebuilding a town from scratch it's not an easy feat. So in the meanwhile, these transitional houses should help a lot.
I want to ask you, let's delve into the world of politics. We definitely want to talk about your view of the president and his fitness to run for re-election. But let's start a little bit with local politics. I happened to see you on the street in downtown, a sign waving with Speaker Psyche. I know that you do that in your role as a private citizen, not necessarily as an elected official, but tell us about your decision to wade into the local races this season and which ones you're going to be, taking that kind of action on.
Sure. Look, this is my first time as governor, so this is my first election where I get to choose whether I want to support other candidates or not. I do it as a person, but I'm not naive enough to think that people don't view me in a different light. Scott Psyche, from my perspective, and I've known Scott since I became a legislator in 2004 and been a friend of his, says nothing negative about his opponent. He helped me fight for that tax break. He helped me fight for Kauhale villages in our state to deal with homelessness. He helped me pass legislation like the housing legislation, which is very difficult to pass, as the top legislator, along with the Senate president, in the body. And so when I see someone that's that important and is getting things done that I also value, I felt it was appropriate to support him. He is my state representative, by the way. I live in his district, and I decided to go sign wave for Scott Psyche, and I appreciate him. The others that I've been supporting in the last couple of weeks, there are two legislators that I appointed and who I thought very highly of, I think very highly of. And so I just felt an obligation. If I feel strongly enough to appoint someone when there's an open seat, that means I believe in them. And that's May Mizuno, who replaced John, who's now my homeless czar, and also Trish LaChica, who I actually recruited to the state of Hawaii some 10 or 15 years ago to work in public health. And look, I know there are great people running in those seats also, and it gives people pause, but when I see the positive in people, I support them. The others I don't know as well. And I'm just one person. People should vote their conscience and do what they think is best. But people have been very generous and supportive of me, and so maybe it makes a difference.
Well, speaking about appointments, there is one appointment that you have to make, and as your role as governor, whenever there is a vacancy in either the House or Senate, it ultimately falls on your shoulders. You spoke about those appointments you made. There is a vacant seat for Maile Shimabukuro seat, who has been in the Senate for some years. We know that deadline is coming up. Have you given much thought into that position and that who you will be appointing into that space?
I have, actually. So I can give you what's tantamount to breaking news. So the circumstance is this. Miley, dear friend who I served with for many years in the Senate and the House, by the way, she stepped aside to retire and go do humanitarian legal work. So good on Miley. The circumstance, though, got complicated because the deadline to appoint someone to fill that seat is July 30th. And the primary is like about 10 days later. The names, and I respect the Democratic Party, of course, they have to give me three names, three people of the same party. And so in this case, it was a Democrat. And the names that they gave me turned out to be the two people that are running against each other, and the third person is running for the state house. And so I was put into a quandary. I have an obligation constitutionally to pick one of these three people and put them in there. But on the flip side of the coin, I have a constitutional obligation to have free and fair elections. And I'm not sure, I felt it couldn't be fair if I put one of the two competitors, both of whom I like and know, into that seat. So I am choosing, after talking to the Attorney General, to not fill that seat until the voters, the people, make the decision. When the people choose either Cedric Gates or Stacey Lynn Eli, whoever gets chosen in that primary, those two names were given to me, I will then appoint that person the day after, once the vote's certified. I think it's the only fair thing to do so that I live up to my constitutional obligation to have a free and fair election.
all of a sudden that primary became all the more important.
Oh, yeah. So it's winner take all in that primary, and the people will then have voted for that person. And I would say this was an unanticipated wrinkle that could occur. In the future, it would be ideal if a governor was never asked to appoint someone into a seat that they're running for, say, for 120 days or something like that. That would require likely a constitutional amendment or maybe even just a rule clarification underneath the Constitution. But I'm just trying to do the right thing. And I'm not trying to give anyone, a hand up. I will say this, Cedric was a stand-up guy. He is the incumbent in the House right now, and he humbly said to me he doesn't deserve, an unfair advantage and that I really shouldn't appoint him. And that was hard for him to say because I'm sure he would have liked to be appointed, but it's just not fair, and I don't think it's fair to the voters. So he did tell me, go forward, do what you got to do, but taking an unfair advantage probably isn't cool. And so I give him credit for that, but I'm not going to appoint anyone to fill it, and I'll let the voters choose.
All right. Well, speaking of politics and staying on that, you have made several national appearances speaking about the conversation that was had between Democratic governors and President Biden following that debate performance now 2 weeks ago, and yet it has been 2 weeks, and this still continues to dominate much of the conversation in Washington, D.C., as well as through media outlets. Wanted again get your personal take in this conversation that you've had with the president and the other governors, and your confidence about him continuing to lead the ticket for the presidential campaign.
Yeah, it's an incredible situation. So first and foremost, let me say I watched the debate like everybody else, and the president did not do a good job during that debate. He knows it. He shared that with all of us as governors and really shared it with the whole country. He knows he didn't do well. He has, however, had 40 plus years of good debates and good service. So when we got together as governors, we were worried, just like every person in a coffee shop, every person out there that may otherwise be rooting for him, like what happened? So it was my job as the one physician governor to say to the president, are you okay? I care about you, because you got to remember the president came to Maui and I developed a relationship with him and the First Lady when he stepped in within 6 hours and helped us get through that early phase of the crisis. He's been getting us hundreds of millions of dollars that we otherwise might not have ever seen. He himself signed off on some of my requests that saved us $250 to $300 million of our own taxpayer money just because I asked humbly for him to do that. So this is a person who's helped us a lot. And why I have a serious concern with what the three governors did when they spoke up and, diminished or, pushed back against President Biden continuing.
And for clarification, the three Hawaii governors.
Yes, forgive me. Yes. The whole three Hawaii governors did that, and I'm greatly disappointed in them, frankly. Not because they shouldn't speak their minds, but because they should have asked me to give them the full picture. Okay, so we talked to President Biden. He was much better. He felt well. He actually had been quite sick that day. No excuses. He had been traveling a lot. That's what presidents do. But at the end of the day, he has won the nomination. And if President Biden chooses to carry on through to the general election all the way, that's his choice with his family, with Jill and his inner circle. It's not for politicos to try to push him in or out. Everyone has an agenda. Everyone in Washington has an agenda. Every governor has an agenda. It's not good. And the only proper position is to let him make his own mind up. Having said that, the Biden-Harris ticket have been very good. He has a great backup quarterback in Kamala Harris. She will be the nominee if the president doesn't stay on the ticket because, first of all, they've raised money together. They've worked together. She has earned millions of people's respect. People, again, will have an opinion. It could come to that. He will make up his own mind, but he should get to make up his own mind, and that's what I learned. I've had several conversations with his team. Everyone is looking at polls. Everyone's trying to see what to do. The real reason that they're checking this so carefully and everyone is so freaked out is because Donald Trump is a sociopath. And he, if you look under his hood, you can look under the hood of the president, and he was terrible that night. And when you're 81 or 78, you're going to have some bad days. You're going to have some bad evenings. But he is a good and decent human being, and almost everyone knows that. We may not agree on policy. I've got a lot of Republican friends that don't like his policies, but but I have grave concerns about former President Trump because he demonstrates every sign of a narcissistic personality disorder. What does that mean for people out there? That means he puts himself first. Everything is about himself. Everything is about how great he is. Everything is about how astounding his work is. And you hear that in his speeches all the time. Then his policies only matter to him. So you've got 65 million women out there who are of reproductive age, and he doesn't care if their rights are gone because of his personality traits. That's what bothers me. So I definitely think the president has to make up his own mind. Whether or not he ends up as the nominee will be his call and his call alone to make. But you can't allow politics like you saw from our three governors or other congressmen or congresswomen, senators to do it. Because, first of all, the ambition of all these other people is outrageous. Everybody wants to be the president of the United States over there in D.C., okay? That's one. And two, the panic is driven by self-interest usually because they're worried that down ticket, if the president gets smushed, that they're going to suffer losses. Let's respect our president after all these years and let him make that decision. I'm confident he'll make the right decision in the end because he wants to beat former President Trump more than anything, probably more than anybody else in this country.
Are you confident? I mean, you just gave a pretty full-throated support of the vice president, but there are a lot of folks who don't necessarily agree with that assessment. You're going to be going to the convention in Chicago. Yeah. You know, tell us about the conversations you're having behind the scenes, and if she were to take the mantle there, of course, then she has to pick a vice president. There's a lot of governors in the mix talking about that. Yeah. Have you had those conversations as well?
I have. So, first of all, if the president picks someone else, because here at the last moment with like 4 months to go, he has to pick someone who knows his policies, knows his cadence, knows everything he's been doing, and she's been a full partner as vice president to him, she would have to be chosen one. Let's talk about politics. We should not for a second think that we're going to walk away from our first woman vice president who rose through the ranks, became attorney general, became a U.S. senator, and then you're going to walk away from her as a Democrat? There's just no way. That's not happening. And she is super smart and super competent, you know, so that's a great thing. Just as a person, that's not a statement about race or gender or anything. So she's earned it, and she would then pick a governor or a senator, I believe, that would balance her ticket. Probably someone from a region that we have to win. Pennsylvania or North Carolina or Arizona. It's you know, it's likely that's what would happen. But as it stands, we have a very balanced ticket. There are great people. I'm friends now with 25 Democratic governors, all right? Let's be honest. Probably every single one of them would love to become vice president if they could help the ticket and win.
What about you?
I got my hands full, you know, here. So I think at the end of the day, it likely will be President Biden, but it will be his decision. If it's not him, it will be Kamala Harris and some extraordinary person that helps us win several states that we need to win, whether it's, you know, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. I'm serious about this, not because I am not okay with a Republican president from time to time. Of course, we have balance, and I work with a lot of those guys. But in this particular case, the idea of bringing back a person who really didn't care for others in Mr. Trump is not good. And so that's why there's so much energy around this issue. This week, we will see the president at NATO, and that's another pretty big deal because of what Russia has done in the Ukraine. I would expect that his performance on that stage, combined with what starts to transpire at the Republicans' convention, may guide this to its completion. Most people now are thinking that he's looking toward the convention, where I will be, and our delegation will be supporting him. It's an amazing circumstance, but the president has been really direct and honest with me and the other governors and the people in D.C. that he truly wants to stay on this ticket and beat Mr. Trump in the election.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, so I want to come back home here and talk about a few of the issues that you're also dealing with. Of course, just if you can quickly give us an update on Aloha Stadium, the bids now down to one, but your overall confidence in this project moving forward, where there continue to be some questions about how this project moves forward, and there's a lot of doubt in the community about it.
Well, there's a process, right? So, yeah, it got down to two, and the purpose of the process is always to see whether or not those who would be the would-be bidders can actually get it done. We don't really have, in my opinion, adequate resources to build a giant stadium that I'd like to have, like 30,000 seats and a roof and so on. But I do think we've got a committed bidder that will do it. We're going to stick to our timetable. The bid process weeded out that other party and they're great people who do a lot of, enormous projects in the state of Hawaii. They just felt that it wasn't for them at the end, because this is not just a stadium project, it's also a housing project. A lot of monies will be put into this. The legislature has $350 million already committed. The zoning provisions are going to allow for the housing. As you know, we've really put a lot of money into the rail station right there. That's important too. The county will have to help us with some of the sewer so that we have adequate sewer systems for the houses and the stadium. We're just going to keep going until things get done. It's amazing to me how things play out in our small state. We don't have a lot of extra contractors or a lot of extra engineers or a lot of extra anything. So sometimes it comes down to one, but the one bid group is pretty phenomenal.
We've got some fun lightning round questions. Before we get to that, I do want to ask you, it is summer. Are you taking a summer vacation? Where is the family going to be recreating this summer?
Yes. So I'm going to spend a couple days later this week. I'll fly to Utah tomorrow to be a part of the Governors Association and to give some talks about disaster mitigation. I'm the chairman now of the kind of the Health and Natural Disaster Committee for the Governors Association, so it's nice of them to let me do that. Then we will, after 3 days, I'll go and have some meetings with the American Cancer Society and their CEO to work on a national plan for governors to fight cancer together, bipartisan. So I'll be pairing red and blue state governors to fight off cancer, to do prevention and build these extraordinary houses, these Hope Lodges, all across the country. And then, yes, try to take a week or two of time away for another family reunion back with my family in the Northeast, just because, it's been a year. And, it's not been as difficult on me as it has been on people in Lahaina. But I do admit it's been every day, 20 hours a day, more or less, trying to work through these challenges. So going to take a little time, go jogging, eat some ice cream, hang with my kids and wife.
All right, sounds like fun. But before we let you go, we always like to ask the governor some fun lightning round questions. We're going to start off with, you watch House of the Dragon. First question, Team Black or Team Green?
Well, I'm committed to Team Green, of course.
Good answer. All right, fill in the blank on this one here. Taylor Swift is...
taking over my life at home because of my 17-year-old daughter.
You're probably not alone there. Okay, what is a nickname that you have that people might not know about or may be surprised to know?
My nickname was Green Bean growing up.
I love it.
Which is, terrible.
Oh, I really like that. I never knew that.
Right.
That's a good one.
Final question, if you could have one superpower, what would it be and why?
Well, I guess it's the veto power, which is what I've got, and thank you for that. As superpowers go, look, I'm just trying to make sure that people's lives are a little better, and that is, it really is a superpower to be a governor. It is such an honor. That's what the other governors told me before. You get to try to do something to help people in the moment, and so I'm grateful for that.
Oh, and we are grateful for all the time you spent with us. Thank you so much for being here. Have a safe trip, and we'll see you when you get back. Spotlight Now continues right after this.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, great to have Governor Josh Green joining us. We covered a lot of topics, including his veto list that we went over in detail, talking about some of his decision-making, that process of how he led to making those decisions, and really faced some pushback by some lawmakers that you heard the governor getting a little passionate about his decisions.
Yeah, he's saying that he made the cuts that were necessary, that he wants to protect the financial health of the state, and that ultimately some of the monies that were allocated, he said, just can't be spent in time, and so that's why why he did what he did. Also very interesting to hear his thought process on Senator Maile Shimabukuro's seat. He's deciding not to fill that seat because he says it's just too close to the primary.
Yeah, ultimately the governor saying that by giving and naming somebody into that seat, that it would be giving an advantage to two of the candidates that are actually running for that seat. And so the governor deciding to step out, not name a person into that seat for that temporary position, and really letting the election play out. It may be one of the first times that this resignation and this appointment has happened so close to an election, the governor deciding not to use his executive power to name a replacement for Senator Shimabukuro.
We also heard about his full-throated support there for the president staying in the role that he's in, but also kind of leaving the door open, saying that Vice President Harris is a very strong candidate if she were to take the mantle, and making it clear that there would be no one else to take that role. He will be in Chicago, but he did list a bunch of places that he's traveling to this summer ahead of the convention.
Yeah, and interesting to note, I mean, the governor has been making his rounds on national television. Of course, the governor, a doctor, being able to speak to the national audience about what his question was about the president's health. But you really heard that endorsement from the governor saying that as long as President Biden decides to stay in the race, that he is sticking behind the president, and also push back on some of the three Hawaii governors who spoke out and said that President Biden should resign. This governor saying, Governor Green, saying that he wished that those three governors had approached him and asked him, because he has had direct conversations and connections with President Biden. But the president, again, very diligent and very stern in his support for President Biden. Also saying he doesn't want to be vice president if it came to it.
Yeah, he's saying that he's got enough on his plate here. And interesting to that last question that you asked him, what he wishes his superpower would be. He already has that superpower, he said. He has the veto power. He signed a flurry of bills. In the end, 7 will be vetoed, along with a number of line item vetoes. Daryl Huff's doing some reporting on that today about some progressive lawmakers who say that the governor has gone too far, and you really heard him push back on that today.
Next week on Spotlight Now, we're going to be switching gears and talking about cultural-based education, how Hawaiian language and culture is really playing an impact into the upbringing of our keiki in our community.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we are talking to folks from Kamehameha schools, but also from the University of Hawaii, talking about what it means to be a Native Hawaiian place of learning, the impact that has not only on the students, but also on the state. So we do hope you join us for that broadcast then. Until then, enjoy this gorgeous view outside. We're taking a look now at Punch Bowl. Have a wonderful rest of your week. See you next Tuesday.